Sorry, could I ask you to come a bit closer to the podium, please? I see so those are a bit far. Please come forward. There are plenty of seats in front. It's going to be very exciting, a very heated debate, so you need to be close to the scene to see all the action. So please come forward. No, they don't bite. Nobody bites. Okay, we'll be starting in just 1 minute, so please use that minute to come closer. Are you ready? So please take a seat, and we will be taking off in a few seconds. Seatbelts need to be fastened. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very, very warm welcome to all of you to this special and exciting roundtable debate on climbing the high fives learning curve. By the way, my name is Simon Mizrahi, and as you might have guessed, I will be moderating this 2-hour session with you. And one thing that I wanted to tell you about me is that as the director of the African Development Bank's self-evaluation department, my job is usually to answer some very tough questions from the people on your left, from the evaluators. So I must say, it does feel particularly good for me to be turning the tables, and rather than answering your tough questions, and putting some very tough questions to you. And I will be, by the way, putting you on the grill. So please, as Rakesh said, fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be interesting. Now, the central question that we've been asked to think about, to reflect and debate is, I find quite intriguing. It says, climbing the high fives learning curve with independent evaluation. It sort of conjures up to me a sort of a climb and mountain kind of image, a peak that would need to be conquered, or maybe more aptly, 5 peaks that we need to climb. But what are these 5 peaks? Why do we need to climb them? Will we be climbing them all at once or one after the other? And how can independent evaluation officers help us reach these 5 summits? So these are just some of the questions that I will be asking today. And to help us answer these very intriguing questions, we have 6 eminent Sherpas that just happen to be evaluation experts and evaluation practitioners. So let me very briefly introduce you to them. So we have with us Keith Leonard, development evaluation expert from EBRD. We have Indra Naidu, director, UNDP Evaluation Office. If you could lift your hand. Safira Patel from DBSA, and she's from the Evaluation Department. Zenda Ophir, the honorary professor at the University of Stellenbosch, but I've been told also a very eminent practitioner, so not an academic, but somebody who deals with the nuts and bolts of evaluation. Oscar Garcia from IFAD, and last, but certainly not least, Rakesh Nangia, and he has a very special title, Evaluator General at the African Development Bank. So a round of applause, please, to all of them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 hours in front of us to debate these fascinating topics, and what I would like to do is to have this make this conversation as lively and as interactive as possible. And to achieve this, the way that I suggest go about doing it is organizing the session, first of all, in two parts. The first session will be very much about the whats and the whys. What are the high fives? Why do we need independent evaluation officers? And I must say that when I was briefing the panel earlier on the questions I was asking, it already raised some eyebrows. And what are the questions that they can help us answer, and what are the questions they cannot answer? The second session of this debate will be around the hows. How should the independent evaluation officers go about evaluating the high fives? Do they need to be independent to do so? And what lessons can or have they learned from their own experience? Now, in between these two sessions, there will be a 30-minute, 20 to 30-minute Q&A session that will allow you to ask them the tough questions or points for clarification that you believe are needed. Now, to make this debate even more interactive, what I'm going to do is to give all of you, both panelists, but also members of the audience, the possibility to interject. So, if you hear the panelists or your fellow panelists say something on which you violently agree or on which you violently disagree, then please hold up both hands, and when I see both hands up, I will let the panelist finish their thought, and then will provide you, well, either with the panelists, fellow panelists, or with you members of the audience, an opportunity to either support the point that's been made or disagree and challenge it. So that is how I suggest going about doing it. For this to work, of course, we all have to interject responsibly. So that means briefly and to the point. So let's see whether this approach works. With those brief words of introduction, let's start the first session, which, as I just noted, I suggest focusing on the whys and the whats, and that will take us to about 10 to 3, at which point we'll start the Q&A session. And just to get the ball rolling, I'm going to turn to each of the 6 panelists, and I think I'm going to start with you, Zenda. And what I'd like you to tell us is to give us 3 reasons why you think we actually do need an independent evaluation office just to get the ball rolling. Zenda.
I would like to start with perhaps just a little bit of context for what I'm going to say. And I first just want to thank African Development Bank for what it's done, if I may, over the years for development of evaluation on the continent. I say that because an organization like the bank is extremely influential. What you do in development and in evaluation does affect all of us. Mohammed and others that we have dealt with have played a major role, and I trust the bank will continue to play a major role in what we do. We need evaluation, and I'll not give 3 reasons. I'll give 1 reason for an independent evaluation unit, but I want to make a second statement before I come to the reason for needing an independent evaluation unit. Is evaluation matters because it affects the lives of a lot of people. If evaluation had played its role, we would not have had, for example, the devastation wreaked by in the 80s structural adjustment programs. In Asia, the Green Revolution that had tremendous negative consequences. Many failures during the Millennium Development Goal era that have been captured and lessons since. These are tremendous failures in development that evaluation could have been preventing if it was properly conducted. So the role that evaluation can play is tremendously important, and we have learned that some of the reasons why evaluation was not well done in the past or not done at all to help us understand how development can be done better. The bank being a leader in evaluation or in development means that it brings huge responsibility for doing work well. And so having an independent evaluation perspective on what is being done is tremendously important, because the very nature of evaluation is such that it makes us feel uncomfortable. If we execute programs, of course, we are not very keen to be looked at from an evaluation perspective. And very often we perhaps do not provide enough information and tend to hide some of the weaknesses that we have if we are implementers. So very simply, we all know this, independent evaluation is crucial in order to ensure, number one, that evaluation contributes to development in sound ways, in ways that are bring an independent perspective that people from inside an organization may not bring. And it certainly brings accountability, where accountability is not contradictory to learning, but accountability brings that element that very often from inside an organization may not be clear. I just want to end there. I wanted to make the initial comments only because I believe we need to think very deeply about evaluation as a practice, not just independent evaluation, of course. And I think we need to be very clear about why evaluation is important and why we need independent as well as self-evaluation. And I hope we cover all of that.
Thank you very much, Senator. That was very good. So I really take out 3 reasons that you mentioned. It affects the lives of people. It helps development do a better job of what it needs to do, and it improves accountability. Rakesh, do you share these points? I'm sure you have a different perspective, but what are the 3 reasons, as far as you're concerned, why we need an independent evaluation office?
Good question, in the sense of, because obviously all of us feel, as evaluators, the importance of the sort of work that we're doing. Let me frame it in the institutional context first. All of us, whether they're management, evaluators, self-evaluation, otherwise, share the same objective. We are trying to improve development outcomes, period. The question then becomes, how does what management do, how does what your shop, Simon, in terms of self-evaluation do, and how does the independent evaluation that we do, how does this contribute to that same objective? And this perhaps is the way I perceive us as the independent side, as the third eye. So we can have perhaps a check and balance, or at least provide different insights into same activities, which may help provide at least a sense of positive direction where some of the things you may not see. So it's a question of people running on a treadmill and not having a chance to get off and see, are we even going in the right direction? So that, I think, is the first part. The second is the ex post side, which brings together lessons. So the objective here would be to ensure that we are learning from past mistakes. Do not make the same mistakes again, hopefully. But this does not mean that we do not make any mistakes, because then we are getting into a very risk-averse culture. So there's a fine balance there, and I think both self-evaluation and independent evaluation have a role to play in identifying those lessons. We may always not agree with the same lessons, but I think bringing together those lessons and debate in there would be very helpful. Third, I think, and this perhaps may be a little controversial with others, I personally believe that we, and we here includes both self-evaluation and independent evaluation, have a responsibility in building the evaluation systems and culture in our regional member countries. Why? Because the work that we put in, so the lending program of the African Development Bank or the World Bank or other multilateral development institutions is a very small part of the public investment program in any country. Our objective, therefore, should be to improve the development outcomes of the entire public investment program and not just our initiatives. And that's perhaps why it would be important for us to be building the evaluation culture and building the evaluation systems in the regional member countries.
Thank you very much, Rakesh. Indran, your perspective.
So it's focusing on whether the organization meets the mandate as set out, and obviously it provides information to management and others on what goes on. The second is it provides an alternative perspective and reality of what is going on the ground, hence the citizen element that is quite clear. And the third issue, it induces an element of debate transparency, accountability, and legitimacy. And it is for that reason that while it may have an inherent conflictual nature, being independent, because it provides a judgment, as evaluation definition is, it is very much focused on people on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Oscar, you're also part of the UN system.
Thank you very much. Also, on behalf of the Independent Office of Evaluation of IFAD, I would like to highlight that the main reason why we do our work is for enhanced development effectiveness. Our institutions, all of them, need to produce better results on the ground, affecting the lives of people, particularly in the continent. And evaluation helps to see if the organizations are doing things right, according to their plan. But in addition to that, if the organizations are doing the right thing. And this usually questions the assumptions behind certain interventions or development programs. The capacity to question the assumptions and to ask the question why is for me a very distinctive feature of our profession. If we are able to address the why, what are the factors that are leading to performance, then we would be able to give back feedback to our organizations and deal with something that was mentioned during these 2 days, which is very important. And it is that we are entrusted with the trust of our stakeholders. Our government and member states trust these institutions. They provide financial resources. They provide expertise. And our beneficiaries, the communities that we work with in the different developing countries, also trust this expertise and this knowledge and these financial instruments so that they could improve their living conditions. And that is why evaluation as part of the accountability framework of an organization is extremely important to reinforce that the mandate of our organizations is being fulfilled.
Thank you, Oscar. Over to you, Keith.
Yes, thank you. I'm still trying to come to terms with the idea that evaluators can be exciting people, but let's see. I'm with the Independent Evaluation Department of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD for short. We're different in the sense of an MDB that 80% of our financing goes directly to the private sector, 80%. So we are putting equity, loans. We also do transactions in national capital markets by issuing bonds, so we can do local currency lending. So we have some distinct issues and challenges. Well, I think the reasons why we have independent evaluation officers have been fairly well established by my colleagues, the objectivity, freedom from bias, and so on. But I also want to make the point that I think there's a very need for a clear distinction between structural independence, that is the reporting relationship of the evaluation office directly to boards, which is what we normally mean, I think, when we talk about independent evaluation officers. But even more important to my mind is behavioral independence. Are we doing the evaluations with freedom of bias? Just because you report in a different way doesn't mean to say you're going to be expressing behavioral independence. And I think that's even more important than the structural independence. I also think, but I won't say much about this because it's straying on to a later question, that independent evaluation, because it focuses mostly on ex post evaluation, is entirely or is sufficient for what's needed for maximizing evaluation's contribution to the high fives. But I'll come back to that at a later moment.
Thank you very much, Keith. And indeed, we will be discussing in the second session issues around the independence. But I note a number of you have already flagged the importance, and I think it's a very interesting distinction you just made between the structural and the behavioral independence. Safira, you're the last panelist, and so your take. There is quite a bit of commonality that's coming out of the different interventions, and I'll come back to that in a second. But I know that your special interest is in particular as well building capacity. So.
Okay, so my 3 reasons for whether or not we need an independent evaluation department. Firstly, obviously, and it's come out previously already, is the need for evidence and learning to help us make sure we're doing the right thing in the right way, and also to identify any of the things we did maybe in the wrong way or we could have done better. But that is a general thread here that's come out. Secondly, for me, I think the sharing of the knowledge with other stakeholders, other DFIs and other key stakeholders that will be part of and working with the AfDB to achieve the high fives. I think that is fundamentally important. And following on from that is the whole issue of building capacity. I think it's important that we need to have an independent evaluation function. However, if you look at many of the DFIs within Africa, maybe the smaller DFIs, and you start looking at their independent evaluation units and what's being produced by those units and how everything is functioning in those units, you'll find that the capacity is pretty small to be able to do proper impact evaluations or results evaluations. And something we've been discussing earlier, the concept of trying to do a regional evaluation is also very limited, and the abilities within these evaluation departments are very limited. Most of the evaluation departments tend to be sitting somewhere within the organization or sitting in strategy, so it's not necessarily physically independent. But also, because of the capacity constraints, these evaluation departments tend to focus only on outputs, not because there isn't a will to do proper results or impact evaluation, but because there's a lack of capacity. And therefore, what the quickest and easiest thing to do is to look at the outputs and evaluate outputs. So I think in having a proper independent evaluation unit or perspective in achieving the high fives is fundamentally important. But part of that, to enable the delivery on the high fives, is to be able to build that capacity with other stakeholders in the region to enable the achievement of the high fives.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Well, a lot of very interesting things came out of these interventions. I took out of them 4 of them in particular that struck me. I think there's quite a bit of commonality and again, different perspectives on it. On the question of perspectives, I think I heard a number of you saying the importance of providing different, sorry, isn't it close enough? The importance of providing different perspectives on the same topics, and nobody is better placed than an independent evaluation officer to provide those different perspectives and different angles on the same issues. You all emphasized, I think, the importance of knowledge and capacity in building knowledge, and in particular, as Oscar pointed out, knowledge and the capacity to challenge some of the assumptions. I think that's a very important function. And fourthly, I think to help the institutions achieve their development mandate and to perform all of these functions, independence is critical. So I think these are some of the things that I've taken out. I'm just looking around the room to see whether there are any two-handed interventions, whether you would like to support or challenge what you've just heard. If I don't see any two-handers, then we'll be moving to my next question, in particular to, two-hander from Rakesh, please.
Just trying to be provocative now.
Please do.
First, on the question of independence, I heard Keith say behavioral and structural. We have some issues on financial independence as well. And I don't know if everybody else shares that opinion or not. Second, I heard Indran say going to the citizens, and therefore that's the final objective, and the mandate over management. At least in our, the way we are looking at it, we don't many times go directly to the citizens. We're looking at the objectives of the program, strategy, etc., and looking at it from an objectives-based evaluation. Yes, they're part of the interview process and so on, but they're not the final beneficiaries that we are measuring things. They are the beneficiaries, yes, but that's not how we're measuring when we're going into evaluations.
Thanks very much. So I think that's a question to Oscar in particular. Financial independence, is that part of behavioral independence or more likely structural independence? And then I'll be turning to Indran for a question, follow-up question on an important point that you made on the role of citizens as well and accountability. Oscar.
Thank you very much. It is part of structural independence, in my view, because it really provides, as we have been practitioners in the field of evaluation, we know that the independence is constantly undermined in various forms. And that is why it is important to secure the appropriate budget for conducting evaluations, so that if you have the mandate of conducting evaluation and you don't have the budget, by default, you will not be able to do proper evaluations. And therefore, it's important to have capacity to manage your financial resources as well as your human resources. If you are working with a team that will be penalized because they have been too blunt in the presentation of findings that are not of the liking of the stakeholders being involved in the evaluation, then again, it undermines the independence. That's why I think it's part of the structural, and we will delve more deeply into the debate between the importance of having independent evaluation functions or not, and of course about the necessary complementarity between what we understand as self-evaluation and independent evaluation, which are necessarily going hand in hand.
Yeah, two good points, Oscar, and we will be coming back to the question of independence in the second session, where it'll be a specific question that I'll be putting to you. Indran, on I was also struck by the point that you made by the role and the relationship between independent officers and citizens. Can you elaborate on that point?
The programs that are laid out, for example, in UNDP, argue that it's going to deliver a set of benefits to the citizens. The citizens are represented by the governments, and the program, before it starts, is an agreement between the UNDP and the respective governments. So when we evaluate the program, the Independent Evaluation Office is evaluating that program to see whether the benefits that have been agreed upon have been realized. So after a process of about 6 to 8 months, when we go and debrief, we debrief with the non-government sector, with the various UN agencies, with the government, etc. And that's a way in which you actually give feedback and provide that input. And of course, it tends to be a big media event. I think the issue is about who is the ultimate client. The ultimate client for us are those that fund the UNDP, who support it, and in this instance also who should benefit from the programs as stated. And that's, I think, a little bit of the difference with the independent part.
Thank you very much indeed for those excellent interventions. We're now going to move into the substance of the topic and focus more specifically on the high fives. I do appreciate that we spent quite a couple of days talking about the high fives, but I think it would be useful, Rakesh, if you could remind us what these high fives are and what makes them novel from an evaluator's perspective. I think once we've got that, then I'll be turning again to the panelists for more specific questions along those lines. Rakesh.
Yes, I'll give you my perspective on it. May not always be the same as some others. First, of course, when President Adesina took office, he wanted to fine-tune the overarching objectives outlined in the 10-year strategy, which had just been approved, I think, a year before he came on. And so my presumption is that he looked at the 10-year strategy and wanted to focus on these 5 areas, which were Light Up and Power Africa, Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. The objectives seem very clear, and yes, there is a huge energy gap, for instance, in Africa, and yesterday and day before, when panelists were talking about satellites flying over Africa, it looks like a dark continent and so on. When we look at the per capita consumption of electricity, we know it is a huge challenge. Similarly, when we look at integrating Africa, and we discussed very briefly everything from Africa passports and allowing freedom of movement of both people and goods, obviously that's not happening today. The intra-Africa trade, while growing, is still very small, relatively speaking. Franny talked very eloquently about industrializing Africa this morning, and as we go on, we look at many of the other aspects of industrializing Africa as well. Why is it that within all of the constraints which are not new, why is it that there is not a huge manufacturing base, for instance, within Africa? why is Africa still exporting much of the raw materials rather than value-added production? So I think, and I'm not going to ramble on each of the high fives, but I think the bottom line was that the combination of trying to fine-tune from the 10-year strategy out to the basic constraints was very clear. So the challenge I have is improving the quality of lives of the people of Africa, because according to me, it encompasses all of the 4 other high fives and more. So I do not see the granularity in that last high five, but the rest of it, I think, are fairly straightforward and fairly clear.
Okay, thank you. One, I think, interesting point that you raised, Rakesh, in your introduction on the high fives is the question of handling transitions. When, for example, like in the case of the African Development Bank, there is a transition in the strategic focus. Additional focus is given to a subset of very important items, and you mentioned the high fives in particular. And it also means changes in approaches, changes in the way that we do business. All of this requires, of course, learning from the organizations, the staff that work for development institutions. It also probably requires learning and adjustments when it comes to evaluation officers. So the question that I would like to put to you, panelists, is how you go about handling these transitions from the perspective of an independent evaluation office, and what are the particular set of challenges when you move from one development mandate to another development mandate. So this is a question that I'd like to put to you. I don't know who would like to provide a first perspective on this question. I'll give you a couple of seconds to reflect, but Oscar, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you very much. It is indeed a very important and interesting question. And we have heard during these 2 days this new strategy that the bank is putting on. So I don't think the mandate has changed. It's just an adjustment of the strategy. And as such, new emphases are coming. And this is how really development works. We have seen that in the 90s when the gender equality came into vogue, and how it moved the overall agenda to attention of the gender issues. Now we're living in the era of sustainable development, and again, this integrated approach to take care of the natural resources and environment, together with the economic prosperity and the social inclusion, are part of the agenda, and therefore our institutions are adjusting to that. And I think from the evaluation point of view, we have a responsibility to adjust as well, and accompany our organizations to focus their attention on the critical linkages that exist under this new strategic framework. And that is why the 5 highs have interconnectivity that are very important to identify. And that will necessarily push the evaluation function to identify those linkages. This morning we have reflected about the theory of change and how it is sequenced, therefore, the different 5 highs, and how it is important to first provide energy to the continent in order to achieve the other 4 fives. And so I think the evaluation has a role to play. And now, to conclude very briefly, there is also room for conducting joint evaluations, because the 5 high fives will necessarily establish new partnerships where co-financing will take place among different type of institutions, and with those co-finance programs, more joint evaluation can happen.
Thank you, Oscar. Keith?
Yeah, I'd like to make the point that while there is a new era with the approval of the high fives, most of the results that the African Development Bank will be producing over the next few years will be as a result of decisions made in the past before the adoption of this new strategy, because you don't stop the projects all of a sudden to roll out a new set of projects. That's one point. Then another point I would think is that ultimately it comes down to, I think, to an extent, a repackaging, a refocusing. I mean, it's not like a radical shift off into some total new direction. So, and then the third point I'd make, I often say as an evaluator that I can evaluate anything provided it's clear what it is that you think you're setting out to achieve and why you think you're going to achieve it. So provided those preconditions are met, then there's no great problem about evaluate. Well, maybe there's a bit of a problem, but at least that's a good start.
Thank you. Zenta, you want to step in and bring in a different perspective. You don't actually work for a development institution, but you provide, you're not an academic, but please.
Yeah, I don't work in an institution with an independent evaluation office going through transition. I want to bring the perspective that this is a time of renewal. Any transition is a time during which you can renew. The question is, to what extent is it possible to do the renewal that's needed in our current context? The Sustainable Development Goals, as well as your high fives, emphasize the integrated, complex systems nature of development. But our way of planning and thinking often, and working as evaluators often don't account for that. Because many of you may have read the rather devastating critique by Ben Ramalingam in his book written in 2013 about development and how it is perceived. Where it's seen as linear, it's often the integration is not recognized, context is not properly recognized, culture is not properly recognized. We don't recognize that it's not very predictable exactly how things will unfold. I'm sure you all know the implications of looking at development as through a complex systems lens. What it means is that there's, in a way, coming a conflict between results-based management and what is needed to deal with systems, which is adaptive management. There's some tension there. Because in the one case, adaptive management, many people regard as something that you cannot have fixed results because you don't know what the development trajectory is. You don't know what an intervention's trajectory is. You cannot predict that in 5 years you will be at a particular place. That's just one implication. So when we deal in a rigid way with a results-based management and outcomes that are rigidly established, you are running into trouble if trajectories are not predictable. So one way to deal with that we all need to deal with much better is adaptive management, and that means the flexibility to adjust strategies and potentially also outcomes as you move forward. Now, it can serve obviously as an early warning system. It's a very good thing to be able to adapt, but you cannot then just deal with rigid monitorings and not well-designed monitoring systems. You need to work towards impacts, and you need to track impacts while you implement. And there are many other implications of this. The question is whether in this time of transition, given the integrated nature of your high fives and the need to integrate across the high fives, your whole evaluation approach will shift where it's needed to shift. I'm not from here, so I don't know to what extent you are already doing all of this. But I believe that there's some real work that might be needed. I just want to add one more important thing. The fact that one deals with a complex systems approach to development and to evaluation means one must be in all cases aware of the need to focus on sustainability of impacts. In other words, the design of your interventions already need to reflect an awareness of sustainability of impacts. And this, for example, is something that I know has been said here is not as strong as it should be.
Thank you, Zenta. Safira, you want to step in on this point? And I take it, Indran, you want to follow? Yes, okay. Safira.
I'd just like to reflect on the issue that Zenda has already touched on. The fact that we as evaluators, we're used to things popping up that we may or may not have planned for. We're used to curveballs that come our way in the middle of an evaluation that you really didn't plan for, expect, or anything. So from that perspective, being able to transition to the high fives, I don't believe it should be too much of a problem. I think as evaluators, we are flexible enough to be able to do it. And I see as evaluators on the continent, and anybody who would be involved with the high fives would be very simple to do. I also don't think that it would be that much more difficult from the work we've previously been doing, in that we've always been focused on sustainable development. And the high fives are basically taking that one step further and ensuring that we attain that goal. So I personally think it's just more of a challenge and more of a focus and maybe a refinement of a refinement of what we usually do, but it'll be pretty simple.
Thank you, Safira. And the last word to Indran, or did Oscar, do you want to come in as well at the end? Yes, so Indran and Oscar, and then we'll move on to the next question.
To fully echo Oscar on joint and Zenda on adaptive management, the challenge is not so much taking on new content, high five, SDGs, MDGs, that's the easy part. The challenge from the perspective of independent evaluation officers is how do these officers begin to work in a multi-agent context to refine its methods and approaches that considers more plural methodologies, a greater diversity of approaches, more engagement, so that when you debrief, you actually can deliver as one, which is a big debate in the UN system, and it has not been very successful. It operates at the thing. Is how do you move from that silo approach, which has not delivered the impact that we want, to one that is much more coherent at the level of which it's received. And I think we need to admit, as independent evaluation officers, we have not adequately engaged and had those discussions and conversations, simply because it's very complex for us to do.
Thank you. And Oscar?
Yes, I wanted to illustrate with an example of the importance that you can bring, of the role that evaluation can play. Today, we have heard debates about regional integration. And when listening to the very important presentations on regional integration, there were no mentions about the role of trade, and trade on agricultural products, right, in sub-regions in the continent. Or there were no mentions made to energy projects that could provide energy to sub-regions and that are not national in nature, but provide a public good to the sub-region. And therefore, if the evaluators have that framework of the high fives and see the interlinkages, can help management really identify, asking the questions, why are you not integrating trade of agricultural products in this new integration frameworks or in these new energy projects? And therefore, that's why I mean that although it might not be that difficult, as mentioned by Safira, it is still challenging for the organization to really adjust to new strategies.
Okay. Oscar, I think we have a two-hander from Rakesh, so I don't know whether he wants to challenge you or support you on this one.
No, I'm not so sure it's a challenge, but it's a challenge we have for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So while Safira and Indran said it's, maybe Indran, you sort of alluded to it, didn't say it, that it's easy to do, we haven't found it that easy to do. And I'll give you an example. When we developed the work program, we developed a 3-year rolling work program, which is done through a very wide consultation process. So everybody from executive directors to managers to task managers to senior civil servants are consulted as we go through the program. What happened when we did the first 3-year program was there was a demand from the deputies and the governors to do a comprehensive evaluation of the bank. Now, the problem was we had already launched into evaluations. And so once you have put in enough resources into an evaluation, everything doesn't fit into one calendar year. There are overlaps and things. You've spent some resources, you don't want that evaluation to go to waste, and yet you want to be responsive to the demands that are coming on, because the evaluations will only be useful if they're timely and demand-based. So we had the challenge of how to not let the resources go to waste and continue to complete the ongoing evaluations while taking on and rejigging our entire work program. And the same thing is just happening now. I don't know whether you want to call it a transition or or a major upheaval. But when the high fives came into place, as both Oscar and Indran were saying, you need to look at the cross linkages in there. So we are currently, tweaking is the wrong word, but shifting our work program to see how each of our evaluations is contributing to the high fives, how it is looking across the linkages, and then changing the work program once again, while trying to be responsive to the people, but making sure that existing resources and ongoing evaluations continue.
Thank you very much, Rakesh. Let me tell you what I've just heard from you. I think a very interesting and varied and rich set of contributions. What I heard is that in the case of the African Development Bank, we're not really dealing with a radical change of direction. We're sort of in the situation of a softer transition, Oscar said, with new emphasis and the need to identify the linkages and the interlinkages between the different areas of this new strategy. Indran pointed out that, and others, that change of content is never a fundamental issue for evaluation officers. We all have regularly to deal with it. And what really matters in this connection is making sure that we have a very clear development mandate that we can use as a basis for evaluation. Having said that, a number of you pointed out on the question of institutional inertia in particular. You know, even if you do push the bar of the boat in a particular direction, the boat continues in the same direction for a while before it gently veers into another one. And that is particularly the case for an institution like our own. We have a stock of operations, 832 billion in the case of the African Development Bank, and for operations that were approved in the past. But, Rakesh, you reminded us that in practice, it is not always very easy. I'm going to put to you a last question in session one, and then open it up to questions and answers from the floor. I haven't seen many two-handers so far, so I would encourage you to do that. And it strikes me that one of the interesting features of the high fives is that it focuses very much on outcomes. The previous 10-year strategy, it was about achieving inclusive growth, which is fundamentally important. It's about transitioning towards green growth, but it wasn't actually framed in terms of outcomes. When you look at the high fives, it is. Light Up and Power Africa. Light Up and Power Africa means in practice providing universal access to electricity to all, or 97% of all Africans. It's feeding Africa. It's industrializing Africa. And for all of these objectives, clear outcomes need or have already been defined. So I think that's an interesting angle or take on this strategy. And I wanted to know from your perspective, very briefly, we've only got a few minutes, maybe 2 minutes, whether this, from your perspective, what are the implications for this for you? I don't know who wants to start. Keith.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for an evaluator, it's great to have a good results framework which is focused on the higher order results. So, you know, if the focus is more on outcomes, then we would only applaud that. The issue is the underlying theory of change that gives rise to those outcomes sound? Will it actually work out in practice? Are the assumptions, as I think Oscar referred to before, that we want to challenge, you know, are they the right assumptions? And the risks, have they been properly identified, and is there a mitigation strategy? And then one thing that generally gets missed out in theories of change is prioritization, doing first things first. You know, it's just all there, you've got to do them all, but in fact, you know, often you have to there are preconditions before you can get the results. But in general, very positive.
Thank you. Indran?
I mean, it's great that we have outcomes, but it's a challenge from an evaluation methodological point of view. We need to, and I think that brings in the theory of change and the importance of it. We have a challenge in measuring, because the UNDP framework results is couched in outcomes. But when we go into the actual measurability, in the absence of clear theories of change or outputs or activities that are, you know, very well articulated, it is a challenge. So what I'm saying is, I think it's great to have the higher order, but the challenge from an evaluation point of view is populating it so we can actually talk to that.
Thank you very much. Zenda.
We tend to have outcomes developed by program or by project, and that then links through some theory of change to a higher, let's say, the high five or your main strategy outcomes. The challenge there is that the link between the program and the project outcomes and the ultimate outcomes that your combined efforts need to achieve is often very, very weak. It's not well defined. There are big gaps in logic. And this means that there's some really crucial things that get missed, that gets neglected when we strive to evaluate outcomes or the road to outcomes. And some of these are of serious concern. And one example is the need for interventions to be sequenced in a certain way and to work in synergy with one another, both the outcomes and different interventions. And we never evaluate for that. We don't. Perhaps the bank does, but you'll be very unusual.
As we know, these high fives integrate and interrelate to each other. So here I would like to contribute by saying, what is really the unit of account of the bank? Is it the project or the program, or the country or the region, or whatever other way to undertake programs? Because we have seen that.
Have been raised by the floor.
Oui, moi c'est Traoré Namblé, réseau ivoirien de suivi évaluateur.
Oui.
Bon, ma question c'était sur le top 5.
Le top 5.
Voilà. Puisque nous avons 5 éléments, est-ce que ici ils peuvent nous dire déjà pour chaque élément les indicateurs qu'ils vont mettre en place? Je pense qu'ils ont déjà réfléchi à ça pour qu'on puisse peut-être qu'un jour, lorsqu'on va évaluer pour savoir que en tout cas, pour les tops, ça évolue.
Très bien, donc une question très précise concernant les indicateurs qui ont été retenus ou seront retenus par la banque pour pouvoir mesurer les top 5. Je crois que c'est plutôt une question pour moi, mais je vais la poser quand même à Rakesh tout à l'heure. Donc, three sets of questions. Gentlemen on the third row in the middle, and then I'll be turning to panelists for some reaction. We'll come back to the floor, so please, if you have more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the panelists for the wonderful reflections and presentations. My name is Pindai Stole from the Center for Development Research and Evaluation in Zimbabwe. My contribution is in two parts. First, I hope that the African Development Bank is not focusing on independent evaluation at an expense of self-evaluation, because if that happens, then we lose the institutional learning and sustaining a culture of evaluation within the bank. Then the second contribution is seeing that these high fives are interlinked. They've got a very logical interlinkage. To what extent has the bank developed the indicators for results? Because I already see that the indicators would be a matrix in which some indicators actually would collect data for more than one area of high five. And I hope that these indicators, if they've been developed, they are both quantitative and qualitative to be contextually relevant within the context of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman just behind, but then we're going to, you'll have further opportunities for asking questions. Two of them I think are very much related. Do we have the tools to be able to measure the high fives, and how we're going to go about doing it? Yes?
Je m'appelle Mortala, expert en évaluation des politiques publiques et en études du développement. Je voudrais faire une petite contribution assortie de deux questions que j'adresse à l'ensemble du panel. Ma contribution va dans le sens de mettre en exergue le rôle de la culture de l'évaluation dans la gestion de nos démocraties en Afrique dans les années à venir. nous savons que dans nos pays, il y a un véritable réveil démocratique. Dans certains pays comme le Sénégal, on peut même dire qu'il s'agit de consolidation d'acquis démocratiques. Quelqu'un l'a souligné hier, cela se traduit par une véritable effervescence au niveau politique, marquée par la multiplication de chaînes de télévision, la naissance de nombreuses radios privées et partout, dans tous ces médias, de nombreux débats politiques. Or, comme disait l'autre, la politique tue le politique. Autrement dit, trop de place aux querelles de politique politicienne étouffe les véritables débats qui doivent porter sur les politiques publiques. Et c'est à ce niveau-là que la culture d'évaluation peut jouer un énorme rôle en mettant les résultats des évaluations sur la place publique pour que ces résultats alimentent les débats politiques afin qu'on rééquilibre les choses, puisque dans un pays comme le Sénégal, les débats sont plutôt des débats de politique politicienne. Alors que si on donne aux participants au débat des arguments issus des évaluations, on peut rééquilibrer les choses. Donc pour moi, félicitations à toutes vos organisations. Je pense qu'il faut aller dans le sens d'implanter la culture d'évaluation dans les pays pour que nos démocraties ne virent pas à ce que nous venons de voir aux États-Unis. On a vu que le débat électoral aux États-Unis était plus politicien que portant sur les politiques. Et puis voici mes questions. Première question. Où en sommes-nous dans l'implantation de ces cultures d'évaluation dans les pays? Monsieur Nanga, avez-vous des données sur le nombre de pays qui ont constitutionnalisé l'évaluation, qui l'ont inscrit dans la loi? Y a-t-il des réticents? Quel est votre pronostic? Est-ce qu'on va dans un avenir où, très rapidement, dans de nombreux pays ou dans tous les pays, on aura atteint ce que les Suisses ont atteint, à savoir complètement inscrire l'évaluation dans la loi? Deuxième question, la dernière, s'il vous plaît.
Rapidement.
Oui. Il y a des approches en évaluation qui sont dites les approches d'évaluation participative qui préconisent que dans les processus d'évaluation, on inclut tous les types d'acteurs, depuis les commanditaires jusqu'aux opérateurs, sans oublier les publics cibles et même la société civile. Au début des années 2000, des approches très audacieuses sont même apparues qui préconisent même qu'on donne le pouvoir à la société civile en mettant en place des instances d'évaluation dans lesquelles sont représentées les différentes parties prenantes et que ces instances d'évaluation soient les interlocutrices des équipes d'évaluateurs. Que pensez-vous de ces approches audacieuses? Ont-elles un avenir en Afrique? Est-ce que vous êtes en train de les pratiquer dans vos différentes organisations?
Merci, monsieur.
Merci.
Je vais vous remercier pour ces questions et je voudrais en profiter pour encourager les francophones, nos amis francophones qui sont parmi nous dans cette salle, à poser des questions, à faire des interventions en français. Donc l'interprétation sera assurée et de toute façon, je pourrai me charger de traduire la question en anglais. Donc je vais commencer par la dernière question peut-être sur l'importance de nourrir, de promouvoir une culture de l'évaluation non seulement dans les institutions de développement, mais également dans nos pays partenaires et à travers l'Afrique. C'était la première question. Je vais peut-être me tourner pour cette question plus particulièrement vers Safira. Je sais que c'est une question, un débat qui l'intéresse tout particulièrement, mais chacun pourra répondre à toutes les questions qui sont proposées. Les deux autres questions portent plus particulièrement sur comment ferons-nous ici à la Banque africaine pour mesurer le top 5 et est-ce que nous avons des indicateurs quantitatifs et qualitatifs pour y parvenir. Et enfin, la première question qui a été posée par Mohamed, que je ne tenterai pas de résumer, que je vous laisserai le soin d'y répondre. Mais commençons peut-être with you, so I'm switching languages. To you, Safira, I know that this is an issue of nurturing evidence-based policies and demand for evidence-based policies, and capacity for doing so is an issue that you feel very strongly about and very knowledgeable about. So maybe on this first question, a first reaction from you, and then I'd encourage other panelists to take the floor as you see fit. Across the African continent. Je viens traduire votre question? Très bien. Okay.
Okay. The importance of nurturing a culture of evaluation, well, everywhere across the African continent specifically. it's fundamentally important that we do that. I think we're all here and we all agree with that. I think primarily for me the biggest role would be in spreading this culture of evaluation. Because what we have and what I've seen quite a lot of is the agreement that evaluation is important and evaluation should be integrated into institutions and we should be doing this regularly and, you know, as something we do each and every day. However, it stops there at the concept of we have an evaluation person or we have an evaluation unit. And you don't see evaluation as an integrated, mainstreamed concept within an organization. So trying to embed a culture of evaluation goes beyond having an evaluation unit or having an evaluation person in an organization. But it becomes something about learning, making sure each and everybody understands their role in the evaluation process. You might not be the evaluator, but you'd have a role in speaking to or providing information and data towards getting that evaluation off the ground or towards finding results from the evaluation. So I fully agree that we need to do this, but it's how do you spread that culture? I've come across it in various organizations in the DBSA. We recognize evaluation, but we have the issue of capacitating for evaluation and providing resources for evaluation. And this again comes back to something that Oscar's raised about financial independence. So do you truly have a culture of evaluation if you've got an evaluation office that doesn't have any financial independence, that every single decision that they make is dependent on whether or not, or every single evaluation that they do is dependent on whether or not the organization actually wants to go and evaluate that? Is it something that we should be relying on approval for before we go ahead and do evaluations? Is that the sort of culture we want to promote? Or is it a case of independent, we need to do this, we can see the results that could add value to us, and we're therefore doing it? But also adding to that is the capacity for evaluation. And I touched on it earlier, where if you don't have enough capacity, you do a half job. You go as far as picking up some outputs and outcomes, and you don't do anything else, which gives you a very lopsided or biased view and results coming out of your evaluation. So for me, embedding a culture of evaluation is fundamentally important, but you need the resources and you need the buy-in at all levels in the organization, not just somebody who says, yeah, we need to do evaluation and this is how it, you know, and therefore we have one person who's entirely responsible for it. So I think evaluation, specifically in the regions I've worked in, needs some advertising over and above the why we evaluate, but actually what happens after you evaluate and the results that come out of that.
Thank you, Sophia. I've got an intervention from Zenda, and I'd like to put Rakesh on the spot on the importance of self-evaluations, and whether you could tell us how much progress we've made in terms of defining and the metrics to measure the high fives. But Zenda, over to you.
One needs to understand that that an evaluative ability is really empowering, right? And it's been with us as a human species since we were born. We all evaluate whether the food is good or whether it is cold outside or whether we have done well in a certain activity. One of the most interesting things for me is what prevents us from having an evaluative ability when we work. And I'm now not talking about evaluators or managers, I mean all of us on the continent. Whether we're in a village or whether we're elsewhere. Why do we not bring evaluative thinking in a structured way into our work? Some do. The Japanese are famous for continuous improvement. Some of my African colleagues tell me that there are certain people in villages that in a way are the guardians of evaluative ability. I mention this because an interesting question for all of us is what we can do to cultivate an understanding of or an evaluative ability across our society. What are the incentives to do that, and what would be the obstacles to cultivating that in our society, in our homes, in the way in which we think and our children think when we study and do our work? So I just leave that because I think that would make evaluators' lives much easier if we actually have a culture across society that's evaluative. And if there are obstacles to this in our culture or in our ways of doing, perhaps we should engage with that.
Thank you. And Rakesh, on self-evaluation, how important is it?
I'm not going to duck the question, but I'm going to first compliment what Safira was saying. I think she made many valuable points on the evaluation culture part. The compliment I have is first, you need enlightened leadership to use the evaluation results to make decisions. And unfortunately, that is in short supply. What we can have, though, is, Senator Dean was just here, we can have a demand-side pull, right? So you want to hold the government accountable, and if the government, especially if the government is not pulling in, is not enlightened and pulling in the evidence base to come to decisions, parliamentarians and hopefully and subsequently citizens can use that. And we've seen that happen quite well with evaluative evidence, whether it is the Auditor General's office and others who put out these reports in the media, and then we have seen citizens and citizen groups come up and start pushing for results from the government. So it's a good accountability tool. But that leaves evaluators in a very lonely spot, and I mean, it's self-evaluation and independent evaluation then becomes more friendly. But I think having a group there to help each other out in that lonely area is a good thing. The question that you raised about self-evaluation, I think as Zenda was saying, when you step out and you figure out is it cold or not, it's self-evaluation. So what is good, I think, is that the stronger and more robust the self-evaluation system is, the better it is for not just independent evaluation, because we can then focus a lot more on many other strategic complementary issues rather than going to the nuts and bolts all the time. But also it is perfect for an institution, because in the end, it's more important for a self-evaluation system to provide, as Zenda was saying, the system of Kaizen is developed mostly on self-evaluation system. The Japanese system of continuous improvement is based on self-evaluation system, not necessarily on an independent evaluation system. So I see a complementarity of roles, and our hope is that the self-evaluation system continues to get stronger and drive the improvements in an organization.